there exists a specific haunting variety of silence that tends to shadow you wherever you go. We aren't talking about the restorative, peaceful quiet that accompanies moments of intentional solitude or meditation. Rather, we are speaking of a heavy, suffocating stillness that takes up residence in your chest. The crushing weight that settles in when you suddenly realize your phone hasn't vibrated with a genuine personal message in weeks, or perhaps even months. It is the profound silence of moving through a bustling, crowded room and feeling as though you're made of glass, completely invisible to the laughing faces around you. It is the sensation of harboring 1,000 thoughts you're desperate to articulate, yet having absolutely no one to receive them. It is the hollow experience of celebrating your small triumphs in an empty room and shouldering the heavy burden of your disappointments entirely in isolation. This is the stark, lived reality for millions of individuals who find themselves navigating life without friends, not because they actively chose a hermetic existence, but due to a complex web of circumstances. It is easy for society to make snap judgments. People often assume that those without friends are simply antisocial, difficult, or that they prefer to be alone. However, that assumption fails to capture the profound nuance of the situation. The psychology underpinning a lack of friendship is far more intricate than a simple matter of personality type or preference. It is usually a tangled tapestry woven from past traumas, learned defensive behaviors, and adaptive survival mechanisms that frequently trap good people in cycles of loneliness they are desperate to escape. To truly understand this psychology is to uncover an uncomfortable truth about the nature of human connection itself. How incredibly fragile it actually is, how effortlessly it can slip through our fingers, and how agonizingly difficult it becomes to reconstruct once the foundation has crumbled. When neuroscientists and psychologists examine the effects of social isolation, they uncover findings that are deeply fascinating and somewhat alarming. The brain of a person who lacks friends doesn't merely suffer from a lack of companionship, it actually begins to undergo structural changes. The neural pathways that are dedicated to social cognition, the parts of us responsible for connection, begin to atrophy from disuse. The specific regions of the brain tasked with decoding facial expressions, interpreting tone of voice, and reading subtle social cues become less active. It is as if the mind, starved of social interaction, slowly begins to forget the language of connection. This is not a sign of weakness or a conscious choice to withdraw. It is the principle of neuroplasticity at work. The brain is simply adapting to an environment where isolation is the norm. But we must ask, how does a person arrive at this desolate place to begin with? The journey toward friendlessness is rarely a sudden event. It almost never happens overnight. Instead, it is usually a slow, gradual erosion of trust that starts with small betrayals or accumulating disappointments. Perhaps the seeds were sown in childhood, with the stinging pain of being systematically excluded from playground games. Maybe it stems from a moment in adolescence where a trusted confidant weaponized secrets that were meant to stay private. Or perhaps it was a social group in adulthood that slowly drifted away without closure or explanation, leaving the individual racking their brain, wondering what flawed aspect of their character caused the abandonment. Each of these painful experiences contributes to a process psychologists refer to as social learning. The brain, in an attempt to keep you safe, begins to wire itself to associate vulnerability with pain, trust with inevitable disappointment, and openness with rejection. Consequently, it develops robust protective mechanisms. It whispers to the individual to hold back, to reveal less of themselves, and to lower their expectations of others. These are not conscious, calculated decisions. They are automatic, reflexive survival responses designed to prevent future heartache. However, over time, these protective walls harden into invisible barriers. The individual begins to view the world through a lens of skepticism. They start interpreting neutral social interactions as evidence of disinterest or hostility. They might read far too deeply into a delayed text response or a cancelled coffee date, viewing it as a personal slight. They often assume that when others show them kindness, it is merely performative politeness rather than genuine interest. This state of hypervigilance regarding social rejection creates a tragic self-fulfilling prophecy. The more they anticipate rejection, the more they subconsciously behave in guarded ways that actually push potential friends away, confirming their worst fears. There is another, deeper layer to this psychology that is frequently overlooked: Individuals without friends often cultivate an incredibly intense, loud inner dialogue. When the external conversation ceases, the internal conversation ramps up to fill the void. They find themselves endlessly replaying past interactions, dissecting every sentence and gesture to hunt for hidden insults or meanings. They rehearse future conversations that may never actually take place. They construct elaborate fantasies regarding the friendships they yearn for. This rich inner world becomes a double-edged sword. It serves as a sanctuary where they can be their authentic selves without fear of judgment, but it also becomes a prison. It is a place where negative thought spirals can spin out of control because there are no external reality checks. Without a trusted friend to challenge their distorted perspectives or offer a gentler, alternative viewpoint, their thinking patterns can become increasingly rigid. They become trapped in an echo chamber of their own insecurities. The cruel irony in all of this is that many people who have no friends possess an exceptionally high level of emotional intelligence. Because they have spent so much time on the periphery, observing human behavior from the outside looking in, they often understand social dynamics far better than those who are actively participating in them. They can detect insincerity from across a crowded room. They notice instantly when a smile doesn't quite reach someone's eyes. They pick up on the microscopic shifts in energy within a group that everyone else seems to miss. But this heightened sensitivity becomes a curse. When you can clearly see through surface-level pleasantries and recognize how much of modern friendship is performative, it becomes incredibly difficult to settle for anything less than a deeply authentic connection. The problem, of course, is that authentic connection demands vulnerability from both parties. And vulnerability feels absolutely terrifying when your history has taught you that it leads to pain. So, they wait. They wait for a safe person, someone who feels secure enough to risk opening up to. They look for someone who demonstrates a genuine, soulful interest rather than mere social obligation, someone who can handle their intensity without being overwhelmed or frightened away. Yet while they are stuck in this waiting room for the perfect connection, they often appear aloof, distant, or uninterested to the outside world. They unknowingly erect a barrier that prevents even potentially good, imperfect friendships from taking root. The psychology of isolation also fundamentally warps how these individuals view themselves. Friendship acts as a mirror. It reflects our positive qualities back to us. Without that mirror, a person's self-image becomes distorted. They begin to hyper-focus on their perceived flaws while minimizing or ignoring their strengths. They convince themselves that they have nothing of value to offer in a relationship. This damaged self-perception becomes a filter through which every social interaction is processed. When someone actually does attempt to connect with them, they often find it impossible to believe the interest is real. They assume the other person must want something, or is just being nice out of pity, or that it's only a matter of time before they discover the truth and leave. This skepticism, born of past wounds, actively sabotages present opportunities for happiness. What makes this dynamic particularly tragic is the hidden intensity of their desire. People without friends often crave connection more ferociously than anyone else. They have tasted the bitterness of its absence so deeply that they understand the value of companionship in ways that socially connected people take for granted. They have no interest in casual acquaintances or meaningless small talk about the weather. They hunger for the kind of friendship where silence is comfortable, where masks can be dropped, and where they are truly known and accepted. This craving for depth over breadth means they often reject opportunities for lighter, casual social connections that could, with time and patience, deepen into something meaningful. They want to bypass the awkward, getting-to-know-you phase and dive straight into soul-bearing conversation. But the reality is that most relationships require time to build that level of trust. By trying to sprint to intimacy, they often trip at the starting line. The adaptation to a friendless existence also distorts the experience of time and memory. Without shared experiences to act as anchors for their memories, time can feel both agonizingly empty and incredibly heavy. They might struggle to recall what they did last month because nothing emotionally significant occurred to mark the passage of time. Alternatively, they might fixate obsessively on a brief, small interaction because it was the only human contact they had all week. Their relationship with solitude becomes deeply complicated. On one hand, they have mastered the art of being alone because survival required it. They have likely developed rich inner lives, creative pursuits, and independent interests. But this comfort with solitude can subtly transform into a trap. The longer they spend in the safety of isolation, the more alien and exhausting social interaction feels. The more foreign it feels, the more anxiety it provokes, and the more anxious they become, the deeper they retreat into their solitary confinement. This cycle deepens when they confront the reality of social rust. Just as muscles atrophy without exercise, social skills degrade without practice. Conversations that once flowed naturally now require immense conscious effort. They find themselves second-guessing their responses, overthinking their timing, and analysing every micro-expression of the other person for signs of boredom. What used to be instinctive becomes mechanical and clunky, like trying to remember how to ride a bicycle after decades of walking. This rustiness creates a cruel feedback loop. They need practice to get better, but they fear practice because they feel unprepared and awkward. They know they are out of practice, which makes them nervous, which impairs their performance, which confirms their belief that they are bad at people. Furthermore, there is the crushing weight of social context. Society has structured itself around the expectation of connection. It expects you to have people to call when good news arrives. It expects you to have a +1 for weddings. It expects you to have character references that aren't just former bosses. When you lack these standard social accessories, you begin to feel as though you are failing at the fundamental task of being human. Consequently, isolated people develop elaborate strategies to conceal their friendlessness. They decline invitations rather than admitting they have no one to bring. They invent excuses to avoid group activities. They learn to deflect casual questions about their weekend plans. This constant performance, pretending to have a social life to avoid pity, is exhausting and serves only to isolate them further from the authentic connection they need. The digital age has added a new complex layer to this psychological burden. Social media provides a relentless 24/7 stream of other people's friendships, milestones, and celebrations. They scroll through images of group dinners, vacations, and parties, feeling like a spectator watching life happen to everyone but themselves. The comparison is unavoidable and visceral. Everyone else seems to possess the secret manual to human connection that they were never given. Yet, paradoxically, the internet also offers a lifeline. Anonymous forums, gaming communities, and digital friendships provide a low-stakes form of connection that feels safer than face-to-face interaction. They can share their thoughts without the vulnerability of physical presence. They can disconnect the moment anxiety spikes, but these digital connections, while a vital survival tool, often highlight the physical emptiness of their immediate reality. The absence of friends also fundamentally alters emotional regulation. Without a confidant to help process experiences, feelings can become overwhelming. Joy feels hollow when it cannot be shared. Sadness feels bottomless when there is no one to offer comfort. Anger has nowhere to go but inward. They become their own sole emotional support system. While this fosters resilience, it also leads to emotional hoarding. They save up stories, jokes, and grievances, hoping for a day when they'll have someone to tell. But if that person arrives, the backlog is too large. They realize they cannot dump years of unexpressed life onto a new person without scaring them away. This psychology involves a torturous relationship with hope. They oscillate between days of optimism, believing they will find their tribe, and days of dark resignation, convincing themselves that solitude is their destiny. This emotional whiplash is exhausting. It also impacts their ability to advocate for themselves. People without friends often become people pleasers or develop a fawn response to trauma. They become excellent at meeting everyone else's needs while neglecting their own, simply to maintain any shred of contact. They become overly accommodating, agreeable, and flexible, hoping that by being low maintenance, they will be allowed to stay. But this strategy backfires. When you constantly mold yourself to fit others, you never allow them to know the real you. You become a reflection, not a person. The fear of being too much, too needy, too intense, too sensitive leads to constant self-monitoring. They are so busy managing their behaviour that they can never truly be present in the moment. Even the concept of home shifts. For the friendless, home is the only place the mask can come off. It is a sanctuary, but it can easily become a bunker that is too comfortable to leave. The outside world feels increasingly hostile, making the safety of home a prison that stunts their growth. However, within this seemingly barren landscape of isolation, something remarkable often emerges. The total absence of external validation forces a confrontation with the self that most socially connected people never have to face. Without friends to tell them who they are, they must discover their identity through deep internal exploration. This often results in profound self-knowledge, unique creativity, and a fierce independence. They become connoisseurs of their own company. They learn what they actually like, distinct from what peer pressure dictates. In many ways, they know themselves more intimately than those who are constantly surrounded by the noise of others ever could. This deep self-awareness creates a final paradox. While they struggle with the mechanics of social connection, they possess a wisdom about human nature that is rare. They see the unspoken hierarchies and the theatre of social life clearly, but this clarity makes it hard to participate in the game. Once you see the matrix, it is hard to pretend it isn't there. You question if laughter is real, you analyse every gesture. The anticipation of social interaction becomes a form of torture, leading to mental rehearsals that drain them before they even leave the house. Their internal critic, unchecked by reassuring friends, becomes a tyrant, judging every social misstep with brutal severity. Even their sleep suffers, as the quiet of the night brings a confrontation with loneliness that the distractions of the day kept at bay. They become anthropologists of connection, studying the ease with which others form bonds, wondering why that natural instinct was bred out of them. This observational skill is a gift, but one that highlights their exclusion. Understanding this psychology is crucial, not just for those who live it, but for everyone. It reveals that connection is not a luxury, it is a biological imperative. But perhaps most importantly, it teaches us that isolation is not a character flaw. It is not a sign that you are broken. It is often the result of a sensitive soul, protecting itself with mechanisms that once served a purpose, but have now outlived their usefulness. For those walking this solitary path, it is vital to remember, your depth, your sensitivity, and your hard-won self-knowledge are not obstacles to friendship. They are exactly the qualities that make you worth knowing. You're not failing at life, you're surviving a difficult chapter, and the very intensity of your struggle is proof of the depth of your capacity to love, once the right doors finally open.